1969, when I was 19 years old, ensconced deep in the stacks of my university library, intently poring over Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, I came across this passage. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. That is, the class, which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. The class, which has the means of material production at its disposal, has control at the same time over the means of mental production, so that thereby, generally speaking, the ideas of those who lack the means of mental production are subject to it. The ruling ideas are nothing more than an ideal expression of the dominant material relationships. The dominant material relationships grasped as ideas. The ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class. Duh! It was so obvious, but I had never heard anyone articulate it before. After all, who runs the schools? Who prints the books? Who puts up the money for Broadway shows? Who owns the radio stations and the television networks? Since Marx and Engels wrote those words, there have been numerous revolutions that succeeded in politically overthrowing, at least temporarily, the ruling class, but none have successfully challenged those ruling ideas. From this articulation of Marx and Engels, we have a strong starting point. Our conceptual life, our emotional life, our cultural framework is socially constructed in relation to and within the material constraints that societies are organized around. However, Marx and Engels provide us with nothing about the nature of the dominant ideas, how they are disseminated, or how to challenge them. They said virtually nothing more on the subject. Their subsequent writings focused primarily on how capitalism worked economically and how to engage it politically. The next helpful development in how to approach this overlay of ruling class ideas, values, and ways of seeing came from Antonio Gramsci, a leader of the Italian Socialist Party in the early 20th century and a founder of the Italian Communist Party. He was arrested by Mussolini's fascist state in 1926 and stayed in prison until he died 11 years later. While in prison, he filled 30 notebooks, about 3,000 pages in all. He covered a lot of subjects. But his overwhelming concern was why the poor, the working class, the oppressed, were not revolting in the wake of World War I, and why many in Europe, instead of organizing socialist revolutions, were embracing fascism and the authoritarian and explicitly violent form of capitalism. Well, Gramsci observed that capitalist authority was maintained not only through violence and political and economic coercion, but also through its cultural and intellectual dominance. Nothing new there. But what Gramsci added was looking at the historical process through which the ruling class, over generations and over centuries, developed what he called a hegemonic culture, a process through which the ruling class, by controlling the means of intellectual and cultural production, propagates its own values, perceptions, and ideas so that they gradually become the common sense of all of us. People in the working class and other classes identified their own good with the good of the capitalists and their values with the values of the capitalists, and thus reinforced the status quo rather than revolting against it. Gramsci's second contribution was to maintain that a key part of the process of social transformation, of revolution, had to be cultural and intellectual engagement, and through that transformation of the ruling hegemony. To challenge the notion that bourgeois values and ways of seeing were normal, natural, universal, and unchanging, the rest of us need, he wrote, to develop a culture of our own, a counter-hegemony that embodies our values, our ways of seeing and thinking and relating. In Gramsci's view, qualitative social transformation can't be achieved by fighting only for economic or political change. Further, Gramsci maintained that the creation of a new dominant hegemony cannot come about through force and coercion. Rather, he argues, we must exert intellectual, cultural, and ethical leadership over a long period of time to a wide spectrum of social forces to create what he called an historic bloc. That is, a bloc that includes the vast majority of humanity. A frontal assault on state power, such as Lenin and the Bolsheviks pulled off in Russia, or Mao and the Communist Party did in China, might happen without first developing a new cultural hegemony. But they could not sustain themselves as history has sadly confirmed, without at the same time creating a new cultural hegemony. Gramsci put it this way in the prison notebooks. An historical act can only be performed by collective man, and this presupposes the attainment of a cultural social unity through which a multiplicity of dispersed wills are welded together in a single aim on the basis of an equal and common conception of the world, both general and particular, where the intellectual base is so well rooted, assimilated, and experienced that it becomes a passion. Great importance is assumed by the question of collectively attaining a singular cultural climate. Now, Gramsci's writings have had a powerful impact, at least on some revolutionaries, particularly in Latin America, who have shifted from a strategy of direct assault on the state toward the activity of constructing independent cultural, educational, and therapeutic centers of power within existing society. And also, I would say, political centers of power. Through the process of building qualitatively new activities, organizations, and social relations, they are engaging in transforming the old. As João Pedro Sadel, who was a leader of the rural Brazilian landless peasants movement, which is one of the largest of these movements. It's been around for 40 years and has hundreds of collective farms that it's set up on abandoned land. He has said, "We need social movements to build up permanent organized forces. Power isn't just in the state. Power is diluted into multiple forms, beginning at home and spreading to the community and society. It is in the schools and in the churches and in the media, as well as the state. This is something we learned from Antonio Gramsci. Changes must begin at the base of society." What Gramsci contributes, then, is an increased recognition of the subjective factor in the process of social transformation and a new strategic vision of what is needed to overthrow not only economic and political structures, but to clear the mental mists fogging our vision, what Marx called the traditions of all the dead generations that weigh like a nightmare on the brains of the living. What Gramsci didn't provide, however, were tactics. How to engage the dominant hegemony, how to create environments in which people could generate their own culture, their own ways of seeing, thinking, and being. The work of figuring that out has been left to us. And by us, I mean the tens of thousands, maybe millions of people who are right now laboring to build just such environments in all corners of the earth. The next observation that I find helpful in understanding what we're up against was provided by the French Marxist anthropologist Pierre Bourdieu. Writing in the 1970s, he noted that all societies, as part of hegemony, develop very deep-seated habits, behaviors that we seldom think about or even recognize, but that nonetheless embody the values and views of the dominant groups. He called this phenomena habitus. He says, all societies set such store in the seemingly most insignificant details of dress, bearing, physical and verbal manners. Treating the body as a memory, they entrust to it an abbreviated and practical form of the fundamental principles of the arbitrary content of culture. The principles embodied in this way are placed beyond the grasp of consciousness, and hence cannot even be made explicit, but are nonetheless capable of instilling a whole cosmology, an ethic, a metaphysic, a political philosophy, through injunctions as insignificant as stand up straight, don't hold your knife in your left hand. The body is thus continuously mingled with the knowledge it reproduces. The most successful ideological effects are those which have no need of words and ask no more than complicitous silence. Complicitous silence is a helpful phrase for what the traditional left has been relative to ruling ideas, assumptions, and emotional constructs of the world we are organizing to change. This complicity was not on purpose. We just had no way of seeing that our very bodies are, as Bourdieu put it, continuously mingled with the knowledge it reproduces. What can we do about that? That is the question I would like you to begin reflecting upon this week.